So this is an overview of what we will be talking about in the workshop today. So before we dive into how to actually find data in STEM, we'll first define what we mean when we say data. And related to that, we'll discuss the differences and similarities between the terms data and statistics. I'll then share a top-level overview of the different types of data you might look for, utilize, or sort of generate throughout the course of your work. Then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, how to actually find this data. And then I'll finish up at the end with a few more resources that you can utilize as you may be looking for data for your projects or assignments. All right. So first, I'm going to start off by talking about what is data. Now, if I was to put multiple different people in a room and ask them what their definition of data is, I would get different answers from every single person. Data is very dependent a lot of times on the context, what discipline you're in, what your research project is. Everyone can sort of think of data in a slightly different way. For today, we're going to use a sort of general, broader definition of data, and that is facts and information collected together for reference and analysis. And data is often the raw information from which statistics are created. And we'll talk about sort of what the difference is between data and statistics here in just a couple of minutes. It's important to note that data by itself, these raw values by themselves, don't have any sort of meaning. They're simply facts or pieces of information. It's only once that data is sorted and analyzed and made up into statistics and different representations, or it's been put into some sort of context or story, that it can allow us to draw conclusions from it. And this is what you often use when you're looking at information for a project. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about statistics. In regular conversation, and I do this all the time myself, the terms data and statistics are often used interchangeably. You'll use them to mean pretty much the same thing. But in the world of academic research, when you're thinking about data as part of research, there is an important distinction between the two, as we sort of highlighted earlier. While the data are those raw pieces of information or facts, statistics are the result of taking that information, analyzing it, and processing it into sort of a ready-to-use type format. And when you consume data from another source, such as a journal article or a news source or something that you might find online, you're often looking at this sort of processed or worked up data. And this comes in many, many different forms that can come in the form of figures, charts, tables, graphs, etc. And the way these statistics are presented, the way that data has been sort of sorted and analyzed, it has been refined to answer specific questions or to test specific hypotheses. So there's some sort of meaning or conclusion that you're meant to draw behind how that data is presented in whatever source that you find it. Now, when thinking about the different types of data that you might be looking for, data can sort of be sorted into two different broad categories. And that would be quantitative and qualitative data. So there are many different ways to think about data, and we'll go into a little bit more of a few different more specific types in a minute, but I wanted to start out with these two definitions because they're probably the most familiar and how you can more broadly speaking, break down what type of data you're looking for. Quantitative data is numeric data that is used when a researcher is trying to quantify some sort of a problem. If they're asking questions such as how many of something, or they're counting something or comparing things on some sort of a numerical scale. This is an example of quantitative data. And this is often processed using different statistical software or spreadsheet software, such as Microsoft Excel or Python, R, SPSS, etc. Qualitative data, on the other hand, describes qualities or characteristics. And this captures sort of those difficult to quantify type dimensions. So we're looking at things such as colors, or we're describing some sort of an observation. So things that are harder to quantify, but are still pieces of information, are still important to the research process. And these are often captured through interviews, case studies, field notes, observations, etc. And there are ways you can sort of categorize this through using software such as In Vivo that allows you to identify themes and then perform sort of quantitative analysis as well. So sometimes you do a little bit of both. So in thinking more specifically, kind of within these categories, what types of data one might look for, there's many others than what I'm showing here on this screen. This is just to sort of give you an idea of some of the major categories and sort of what we'll be looking at today. So the first of those is observational data, and that is data that's captured through observation of a behavior or activity. So this is often where you might place an instrument or some sort of a sensor out in the field and kind of look at what's happening, collecting data as you go. This data is captured in real time, and it's captured without any sort of intervention from the researcher, right? So they just put their instrument or the sensor there, they capture the information as it comes in. That experimental data, on the other hand, is collected through active intervention by a researcher to produce or measure a change in different variables. And they're often looking to determine relationships between different variables, such as if you're doing an experiment in a lab and you're changing the different quantities of like resources or chemicals or whatever you're trying to mix, and you're trying to observe some sort of a change. And this is what we would call experimental data. Simulation data is data that is generated by imitating the operation of real-world processes using computer models. So thinking about things like weather conditions, or even maybe more dangerous or unsafe or unpractical chemical reactions, or any sort of activity, sort of that kind of flows down from these observational and experimental data that have been collected, but might not be practical to test in those real world settings. This is where we would use this simulation data. And it's often used to determine the likelihood of something happening under certain conditions using previously obtained experimental or observational data. So that's a little bit about what data is, what some of the different types of data are. And I talk about all this to sort of prime us for this portion of the workshop, which is really thinking about how do we find this data, right? So we've talked about these kind of different broad categories of data. We've talked about what data is. Now we want to actually look for it. Now we want to actually find that because maybe we're doing a research project, or we're collecting some data for secondary analysis, and we want to know where to actually find that. And There are a lot of different resources out there for looking for your data. I'm going to cover some of the major places to go today. But please feel free to ask questions as we go, or if there's a specific resource that you're interested in, we can talk more. But sort of the different places that we'll talk about when we're thinking about where to search for that data include data repositories, academic institutions, data available through different government agencies, scholarly literature, and then just other data producers as well. All right, so the first place we're going to talk about in terms of looking for data is something called data repositories. And data repositories are sites that allow researchers to deposit their data sets and make them openly or publicly available to other researchers. This is something that's often required as a part of the research process for grant-funded research, for example. Many of these repositories are designed to enhance data sharing and promote access to this research data and scientific knowledge. And they're really, really good places to look if you're wanting to find a good amount of data in a specific field or a specific research topic that you might be interested in. Broadly speaking, there are a few different types of data repositories. There's institutional repositories, which are maintained by academic institutions. And these are repositories of research data and also a lot of times other research outputs that are produced by faculty and students of that institution. We have a repository here at Florida State University. That institutional repository is called DigiNull, and I'll show you in just a minute what that looks like. This does house research data along with theses, dissertations, and publications from FSU authors. There are also what are known as domain or subject repositories, and these are data repositories with a focus on data from a specific discipline or a specific research area. And they're often maintained by professional organizations or federal funding agencies. And this is where you will find a lot of data when you're thinking about repositories, will be these sort of domain-specific repositories. And we'll look at a way to find those in just a minute. The final sort of repository that I want to briefly mention is something called a national repository. And these are designed to preserve and promote a country's national resources data, natural resources data. And they're often designed to preserve data generated inside a specific country, maybe by certain industries or by government employed researchers. So we have like the UK data bank out of the United Kingdom is an example of that, sort of a repository bringing together data produced on specific topics, specific areas within that country. All right, so where to find these data repositories? So the first one of these is FSU's institutional repository called DigiNull. So to find that, you can use this link right here. So it's at diginull.lib.fsu.edu. And this link will be in the copy of the slides that you'll get after the presentation. But just to show you what that looks like, we bring that up here. So this is DigiNull's homepage. And if you are looking for data sets or the data that we have within the repository, you'll want to click on this research repository button. And you can search by a specific topic. You can do advanced searches to find things with specific data, etc. We'll not necessarily go into all of this here today, but this is one place that you can find data, specifically data that's been produced by researchers at Florida State. The other resource that I wanted to show, and this is a really great resource if you're looking for sort of domain or subject specific repositories, this is re3data.org. And that is short for the Registry of Research Data Repositories. I won't often say the full name, it's sort of a tongue twister, so we shorten that to re3data. And this site has probably one of the most comprehensive lists of discipline or subject specific data repositories, and is often kind of the first place I show faculty or students when we're searching for data repositories for their research projects. And this site is maintained and updated by data librarians, information professionals, folks in the field. And so if we go to that, and you can just search re3data.org or Google re3data, and it'll take you right to that site. This is the homepage for that. And there are several different ways that you can search or browse. You can search by specific subject, specific content type. You can look for data that's produced in specific countries. You can also use keywords using this search field here in the middle of the screen. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of take us through one of the features of this site that you can use to sort of parse out a repository. So if you're in a specific discipline or in a specific area and you need to look for a data repository, either to deposit your own data or if you're looking for data to use for your research project, this is one particular way you can do that. So if we go over to browse and we go to this browse by subject, you'll see that we get this really, really cool color wheel. And I always like to show this color wheel. I think it's super cool. And this lets you sort of filter by subject. So we start here kind of very broad with some very broad categories like life sciences, natural sciences, humanities and social sciences, and then we can get more and more specific. So if you're unsure of a specific repository, if you're looking to just kind of see what's out there, you can sort of play around with this, look for repositories that might be listed on re3data. So let's say we want to do something in life sciences. So we click on our life sciences, and now we see that that has spread out a little bit more. We've gotten a little bit more specific. Now I'm going to, let's see. We're going to go here to medicines. Let's say we're looking in medicine under our life sciences. You'll see now we've just got a few categories left. We've got 3 broad categories here, and then this is kind of our final level of organization. So we're just going to try microbiology. And then I'm going to try this microbial ecology and applied microbiology. You can't see the full name unless you hover over it. But what it'll do is if you go through this process and you go all the way down to that final level, is it'll give you a search results page. So you'll see this will have a listing of different data repositories that fit those criteria that you're searching for. Again, if you do the search feature on the front page, or that sort of looks like this, you might be able to find something there as well. Right, so we're actually going to go down to Dryad. So Dryad is sort of an international repository of peer-reviewed scientific and medical literature. It's used a lot in the biomedical sciences as sort of a general data repository. So if we go here and we click on this record, what you'll see is that now when you're in Read3 data, you found a repository, maybe you want some details on what that is, kind of a little bit more information about it, keywords, etc. You can find that on this record page. And what this record page will show is the different subject areas, which is another way you can search for repositories. It'll give you a link to the repository. And then it'll give you some other information about the repository as well. So we find this, we think, okay, this is great, this is good. I'm going to now click on this, and now we'll see we go to the Dryad homepage, which has a bunch of little bees there in the middle. And so that is sort of navigating to a data repository. Now, if you know a specific repository that you're looking for, you can navigate right to that repository, or you can get to it through the library's website, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a really good place to go if you're kind of looking for data, you're wanting to explore, you're unsure where to look or where you might want to deposit your data. Now, let's say once we're in our data repository, we actually want to do a search for a data set. We want to see what that looks like. So if we're in our repository, say we want to look for COVID-19 data, we want to look at that data in Europe. So say we're doing a study on COVID-19, how it affected European countries. We can select that, type that into our search bar, and you'll see we have a page with our data sets that matches those criteria. You'll see over here, there's some more limiters as well. We only got 4 sources from this search, so there's not a whole lot more limiting you need to do, but if you got a large amount of results, you could limit this further by subject area, journal that the data is associated with, the institution, and maybe the file types. But let's say we look at this second data set, scale and dynamics of COVID-19 epidemics across Europe. And what I really want to show is sort of what this record looks like when you're looking at that data. So this is sort of the record page that gives you a lot of information about your data set. So this one actually does a really good job. These can kind of vary in the amount of detail that they have. Some will be a lot more detailed than others. This one is a really good example, I think. So this has a citation for the data set. So there's a persistent identifier. And if you were to use this data in one of your projects, you would want to make sure that you cite this just like you're citing a paper. There's an abstract that tells you a little bit more about the data. They even talk about the methodologies that they use to collect this data. And then up here is probably what you'd be interested in if you're searching for would be the actual data files themselves. So you'll see they have all of the different data files that are associated with this particular project, this overarching data set. And you can download either one of these or all of these from these links here. And so that's sort of how you might find a data set through a data repository. There's many different ways to do it. This is just one example, but that's one way to navigate to a data set through a repository. All right. So I show sort of a screenshot here so you can compare this later as well. I'm going to pause for just a second. I've talked through a good amount so far, just to see if there's any questions on anything that I've talked about so far. If you're all pretty good, just give me like a thumbs up or a green check mark using the Zoom reactions, just so I know we're good, and we'll continue and talk about some more resources. All right, awesome. All right. So now we're going to talk about government data. Data from different government agencies is another really, really great resource when you are looking for data on a wide variety of different topics. The government collects data to aid in policy decisions, in sort of how they set the course of different programs. And they're one of the largest producers of statistics overall. For example, if we think about the US Census Bureau, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and other agencies, they collect a lot of data, both on American citizens, on sort of population demographics, health statistics, etc. And these statistics are free and publicly available through a variety of sources. Some of them do require access through like maybe library resources, but all of these are available often openly through the government agencies themselves. And this data is collected both at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And you can see some examples here on the screen. We'll talk about one of these specifically here in just a minute, so you get an idea of what one of those sites might look like. One of those is the CDC, Center for Disease Control, their data and statistics portal, which is what we'll look at. This provides access to public health statistics by topic. The National Library of Medicine's data discovery page provides access to data sets from select National Library of Medicine resources. As I mentioned before, the US Census Bureau that does sort of our census every 10 years and assorted surveys in between that time. They're one of the key statistical agencies and one of the leading providers of that demographic, economic, and population data. And much of this data is often used even in comparison to some of these other agencies and the data they collect as well. Another really interesting source is the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. They have what they call state fact sheets. And these provide information on things like population, income, food security, education. And then they also talk about farm characteristics, farm finances, agriculture exports, et cetera, because they are the Department of Agriculture. But you'll see, and I'll just show this so we have a moment. So these are typically sorted by state. So if you come to this fact sheets page, you can either select a specific state or you can get a summary of the entire United States. So if we come down to Florida, for instance, and we want to look for data specifically on Florida. I'm going to take off my dark reader for a second. You'll see there are data on population, income, food insecurity, education, breaking that down by a couple different categories. And this will go back a certain number of years typically. Some of this goes back to 1980. And again, this will kind of be a combination of that census data that we talked about earlier, in addition to other types of data that is being collected. So this is one source if you're looking for that particular kind of information. If you are looking for sort of health data, health statistics, the CDC is an awesome resource. There are a ton of different data sets that are publicly available across a variety of fields, a variety of topic areas. This is sort of one of the landing pages. So the data and statistics page, which you can reach at cdc.gov/data statistics. And just looking at this, you see the variety of different topics, and they have data on all of these, and you can really narrow down specific pieces of information. But let's say for our example that we want to look at their COVID-19 data tracker. So this was a tool that was developed during COVID-19 to sort of provide a national level look at different data that was being produced during the pandemic related to cases, hospitalizations, deaths, etc. And so you'll see if you go to this data tracker, you get this dashboard here at the top of the page. And this provides sort of an overall summary. And you'll see this with a lot of these sites that you go to, is that front page or that first page sort of provides an overall view, might have some visualizations, which you can then drill down based on the questions you are hoping to answer. And they do have some more information. They have some definitions down here. So if you're looking more for what this data actually means, if you're looking to take the data and focus it on specific populations or specific questions, the data is broken down like that as well. But if we say wanted to look at case trends, we can click over here. And then now we see that when we do that, we can start drilling down a little more specifically into that data. So these are really nice kind of dynamic dashboards and data sets that are updated fairly regularly. And you can see sort of this case tracker, this sort of figure that we got used to seeing a lot during COVID-19. And this sort of reports the cases for the entire country. You can drill down into specific regions or specific states if you are looking for more specific data. So if we look for Florida, and they're basing this again on cases that have been reported, right? So data is only as good as what has been reported or collected. And you'll see you can actually look at different sets of data through this as well. So this is sort of an average number of cases. If you want to look at cumulative cases sort of over time, this is another type of visualization. So you can see this is one type of example of the kind of data you can get on the CDC and also on other government sites as well. There's really tons of topics and resources here. So if you're looking for open source, openly available data on certain topics, I encourage you to look at some of these resources. And these are just from the federal government that we've looked at before. So if I go back to my presentation, there's also data collected by state and local agencies as well. And this is also another good source of more local information. So they have data for the entire state of Florida, if you are interested in looking at that. So there's this Florida Health Charts Community Health Assessment Resource Tool. And then there's also, in certain cases, even data at the city or the county level. All right, and this is just a screenshot of the COVID-19 dashboard that we were looking at before. All right, so now we've looked at our data repositories, we've looked at government resources. These are some really, really good resources to find data. Now I want to sort of slightly take a different track on this and actually talk about databases and journals. And when we talk about databases and journals, we're often talking about finding scholarly articles, right? But as I sort of pointed out earlier briefly when we were talking about our data repositories and the citations being linked to a publication, the converse of that is also true. Many databases are now providing the ability to link articles with associated data and filter for articles with data. So giving you a way to access those data repositories or those data deposits right from a record for a publication. So that if you're interested in that and you're wanting both the article and the data set, it's a little bit more seamless. And so there are a few examples of that. One of them is this PubMed example that I've shown here. And this is another sort of medical biological sciences database. And many databases will often have something like this associated data as a filter. So you can filter for articles that have associated data. You'll see a link to that particular data set. One example that I am going to show here from a database is something called Web of Science. And if you haven't used this before, this is a very common database that we use for scientific research. It's kind of a catch-all for a lot of different areas within STEM. So if I go to our library's homepage, because a library workshop wouldn't be complete without going to our library resources. So if we search for, we'll just go to our databases search. We know what we're looking for, and that's going to be our Web of Science. So we're going to focus specifically on the data portion. We're not really going to talk about kind of how to search for articles within Web of Science. Those will be for other workshops or other learning sessions that you might go to or your classes. But what we're going to do is we're going to search for a specific topic. And I obviously tested this out earlier because the words are actually still right there. We're going to look at coffee. Say we want to look at its effects on health. So we're going to search for coffee and health as our keywords. And if we do a search and you come over to the left-hand side of the screen, you're looking at those quick filters. You'll see one of those filters is for associated data. And these are articles that are found within Web of Science that have a data set that has been associated with them or a data set that's in a data repository. So if we check that and we click refine, so we can refine our search, now we should get only resources or articles that have that associated data set with them. You'll see this sort of little data type symbol with it next to it on the left-hand side. So now we want to see what this looks like within our database. So if we say click on this right here, so we take this specific article and we scroll down a little bit, sort of beyond most of the other record information. They put this at the bottom a lot of the times. I don't know why. But you'll see a field for associated data. And this will be data that has been associated or linked to this article. And you'll see they're looking at this National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey from the late 80s and early 90s. And so you'll have this data, you have a link to this. So if we click on this, you'll first see some information about that data set. So you'll notice this is somewhat similar to what you saw in Dryad when we were looking in Dryad. So it's got an abstract, it's got some information about the data set, when it was published, when it was indexed, and you'll see who produced this data. So this was a survey through the US Department of Health and Human Services, CDC, and you'll see if we want to find it, we're going to go to another database called ICPSR, which is the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, which is another data repository. So if we click on this DOI, which is a digital object identifier, that will take us to where this data set lives. And from here, you can download the data set, you can export the data to use for your own research or for your own project. So you'll see this is another way to sort of navigate to those data sets, again, going back to those repositories. But it also sort of combines if you are looking for articles or reviews or any other resources for your research, makes it a little bit more seamless as you're going through the research process. All right, so before we go on to the next, we'll just pause here again real quick. Are there any questions on looking through that government data, looking through data for databases and journals? Again, we have the chat open. If you don't have any questions, again, just a thumbs up or green check mark, or you can just let me know you're all right in the chat, and we'll go on to the last portion of our workshop. All right. All right. So the last sort of place or the way to navigate to data sets that we're going to talk about are data sets and statistics that we have here at FSU Libraries. And so FSU Libraries has access to a variety of databases that house published data sets and statistics. And some of these resources are commercial data sets that are licensed for use at FSU. And we do include links as well to openly available sources of data. So a lot of the data repositories, a lot of the sources that we've looked at before, those data sets were openly available. So that's open source data, that government data. So those aren't necessarily things that you have to go through the libraries page to get to. But there are commercial data sets, say in business, for example, or maybe company data sets that we have licensed here through the libraries. And those you normally have to go through our library catalog to access. So to do that, if we go to our library's homepage again, so if we go to our lib.fsu.edu and we look under search options, we're going to go back to our databases search. And you'll see here on sort of the top to middle of the screen, we have this drop-down menu. And we're going to look in this all database types. And you'll see there's several different types here. You might have seen this before if you've kind of played around or looked through the library's catalog. But this third one at the top, this data sets and statistics. So we'll want to click on that. And this is really a listing of different resources that we have that house data from a variety of disciplines. So this isn't necessarily, since we've kept this all subject, this isn't necessarily discipline specific. You can filter down through that, but you'll see we have resources in the sciences through the American Chemical Society or the alloy phase diagram database. We have business resources that might have that business data. We have the data citation index through Web of Science. So we have a lot of different data links to data resources here as well. And so this is another way that you can look for data that we have available through the libraries that you might not be able to find openly available. All right, so going back into my slideshow to sort of finish this up, we've talked quite a bit about types of data, where to look for that data, and some different resources. I do like to close out by just giving a few kind of tips and reminders that when you're looking for that data and you're looking for those data sets, you're often going to get a lot of information, right? And if you're doing a search on a particular topic, you might find 50, 100 data sets. That's going to take a lot of time to go through those. So you're going to need to have a way to sort of evaluate those different data sets that you're looking for and making sure to check for its accuracy, whether it's appropriate for your research question, etc. So just some kind of things to think about when you're looking at a data set, you're looking for a record for a data set. What information is present in the data citation? What is the source of that? Who's the author? Who's the collecting agency if it's a government agency? If there's a publication that it's associated with, is there a link back to that publication? Is there a description and documentation for that data set? Most of the ones that we looked at today had really detailed abstracts that sort of told us what the data set covered, what was being collected in there. So we had some really good information there. But is that present? And then also for if you're downloading that data, kind of what file formats is that raw data saved in? Do you have software that can open that data? So looking at whether it's something that's more universal, like a CSV file or a text file, or whether it's saved in a proprietary file format. Now, I will say you aren't going to necessarily know all the answers to these right when you're first performing a search for data sets, and that's perfectly fine. But when you find a data set that might be of interest, these are good questions to ask for to sort of evaluate if it's relevant and useful to your research project or topic. And so those are pretty much all of the things that I just talked about. And when you find a particular data set and say you're going to utilize that in a paper or report that you're working on, or maybe you're going to perform some secondary analysis on that data set, it is important to cite that data. And you do this pretty similar to how you would cite other sources of information, such as a journal article or a news article. And this data citation really helps other researchers identify and locate this referenced data. It enables other researchers to easily reuse and verify that data. And it also allows these scholars who produce that data to sort of track its impact, right? So we often think about tracking those number of citations or something for a journal article. So doing this for data is also very important, particularly when we're talking about data that's openly available, has been made that way by the researcher on different sites. It sort of allows us to track that. And if you're looking for more information on like how to cite data, particular formats, I have a link here to a guide from Michigan State University that does a really, really good job of this. And so with that, sort of brings us to the end of the workshop. I did want to just put on some other resources that are available when you might be searching for data, you're looking for different pieces of information. There is a list of data repositories here from Springer Nature, which is one of the vendors for our journals and other things like that. They have a really, really nice list of different repositories broken down by subject area. Data USA is a website and visualization engine that has public US government data. So it sort of collates data from several different government agencies. I sort of mentioned ICPSR earlier. There's a link to their site and to a YouTube channel where they do some more tutorials. And then, of course, a link to our research data services page at FSU Libraries. If you are looking through some of these resources and you have questions at any point on a specific research area, specific topic, and you want some more assistance on finding data for your project, our librarians here at FSU Libraries, we're always happy to help, always happy to take those questions. Please reach out to us. All right, and so that's sort of the end of the workshop. I'm going to put a link in here to a short survey. You'll also get a link to this after the presentation at some point, but I'll go ahead and throw this in the chat. And this is really just for us to sort of evaluate workshop, how it went, what topics you might want to see in future workshops. So please take a minute or two to fill that out. We really appreciate it. And then if you have any questions after the session, after we're done today, please feel free to reach out to me, send an email, always happy to chat more. And with that, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your attention. We'll be here for another minute or two if you have questions. Otherwise, thanks for coming. Have a great rest of your day.